First of all, if I start to babble incoherently, you have to pardon me. I'm a father of a 2-week-old son, and this did indeed reduce my ability to get sleep over the last couple of days. But I'll try to do it. So, what I'm going to talk about today is perhaps somewhat in the continuity of what Richard Rogers was talking about today, some of the questions he addressed, or the discussion that went off from there concerning epistemology. What I'm interested in general to show you today is somewhat derived just from the two things I'm doing at the moment, research-wise. It's on the one hand side, I'm working in a research project that's called IPRI, Internet of Plurality and Redundancy of Information, which is in collaboration with the University in Lyon. That research project has two elements, where well, it's more than two elements, but it has two technical elements. Our main research question is actually the question is the web media sphere more pluralistic than the classical online news media sphere? That's the starting point. Of course, I'm not as naive to think that you could easily give an answer to that. But there are two technical elements. One is a tool that basically downloads via RSS news articles from news sites, about 300 news sites, French language news sites, and we have a series of clustering algorithms and also tools that help us to do some manual work on that. And the question is basically, well, how can we map topics on the web? How can we look at how they emerge? Which are the sites where they first pop up? So one of the things we're doing is actually classify news sources by a certain series of criteria. For example, well, there's portals like Yahoo News, which are basically direct outlets of news agency content, etc. And then there are sites where you have a lot of original content popping up. Myself, I work on the second axis, which is focused on Twitter. So what we're interested in is basically how this, let's call it, official media sphere interacts with the more undisciplined, unruly, uncontrolled, messy, unofficial media sphere that is Twitter. So I'm currently building together with a couple of collaborators a tool we call it Tweetism that allows as well to do a series of research on Twitter. I'm not going to go into details of that tool, but I want to address a series of practical questions that we encountered, which I think are probably quite relevant to most of you here in this room. So that's the first axis of what I'm doing. The second axis is I've been working for a year now on a book project on the history of information processing. So I'm really interested in the methodological aspects of digital methods for themselves. So I basically want to know, how do we build knowledge? And in general, when I use the word epistemology, I use it in that Kantian sense, really the idea of how do we know, what is knowledge, how do we build knowledge? And I'm interested not necessarily in how people online build knowledge, but how we as researchers build knowledge about those spaces. So I'm going to start off really quickly with 5 very practical questions that basically I think need some addressing. And I'm going to particularly perhaps focus on the question of manual work versus machine work, because I think this is also something that is quite pressing. And I'm also going to argue the question of decision making inside of a research project. We have so many possibilities. There are technical possibilities, but then we have so many questions we can. So the first element is space. I just push out a couple of ideas here. This is a MySQL query, the result of a MySQL query on our current Tweetism database. We have a sample of about 10,000 user accounts that we read, that we follow constantly. And this is basically just a list of the most common mentions of locality in those accounts. So, well, perhaps so we have, for example, 1,984 people of our sample have in their location field on their account, they have Paris. Okay? 692 have France. 1,590 have nothing. Okay? So one might think that even with data that is as simple as geographic data and geographic data that is as simple as a location field in a social network service, it would be easy to work with this, but actually it's not that easy. For example, well, starting out, we have of course the classical problem of just how do we, how do people formalize information, and well, here are a series of possibilities of how you might enter Paris. I've counted more than 100 different versions of basically saying I'm in Paris inside of that. Inside of our own sample, which is actually not that big. I mean, it's 10,000 accounts. So that would be one problem. A second problem would be, well, we actually have space on several different levels. For example, here we have France, Europe, Belgium, Ile-de-France, which is the region you're currently in, the Paris and the departments around it. So the moment we, for example, want to visualize a series of let's say geographical representations, how do we get those data into? Do we just leave, for example, if I want to make a map of Twitter accounts in France, do I just leave out France? If somebody puts in France, do I try to perhaps take some other way? Am I going to look for to the IP address? And there's a lot of yeah. So and very often this would involve manual work, and even if I find an automatic mechanism, well, here I'm sitting and I'm reasoning about those questions. So the technical implementation will follow the reasoning process that I've chosen to adopt. Then we have another category of location, which is the location I don't give you my location, which of course might be significant, might not be significant. Then we have here my favorite category, which is everywhere, right? But of course, all that data, in a sense, floats on the uncertainty of space. One element of that uncertainty could be that, well, basically we have a lot of people who live in London and who post in French, or who are mostly linked to the French media sphere. We also have just the question is, well, of course we have the location here, but a lot of people, they are constant migrants in a sense. So they go from one place to another, etc. So even just to give you to make my point, even a data set as seemingly innocent as and simple as that one actually forces us to ask a series of questions. The second point that I want to raise is language or content. Our database currently has 1.5 million tweets. As you know, a tweet is not a lot of text, so it's in the not that many words, but it is quite a lot of data. So manual work is going to be quite difficult. So one of the questions we ask ourselves: well, how do we work with natural language? Do we, for example, try out natural language processing techniques? Are we interested in that? Can we do it? Do we have the resources? Something we have been experimenting with is content extraction. So work, for example, concept extraction. Working with, for example, industrial tools. Let's say data extraction tools in the data mining field. There are a lot of APIs around. They can, you just push them your content. They will extract locations, names, industry terms, etc. How do we work with those? Lemmatization is something we've been exploring, but there are very different levels of lemmatization. I mean, just to transform, try to bring a word, a verb back to its stem form can be done in very different ways. And for example, we tried to work with TreeTiger. I told that story before. Working on a subject as a retraite in French. It's currently a very hot subject, very, very hot. It means retirement, yeah. And TreeTiger, for example, reduces retraite to the verb retraité, which does not necessarily reference the pension element of it. So that's a huge question. Are we able to provide for all the cases that might appear? Can we do that? Can we? Yeah. Another question that we are asking: should we retranslate abbreviations? Twitter, of course, 140 signs, so there's a lot of abbreviations in there. How do we work with them? Do we create manual lists? Do we try to bring them back together? Another way of dealing with that, we've not yet explored, but we're thinking about, is to work with n-grams. I don't know if you've heard of this technique. It's basically the idea that if I have, let's say, a 140 character post, instead of trying to identify words, what I would do is, let's say, take the first 5 characters, starting at the beginning of the chain, then take the next 5 characters, starting at point 1, next 5 characters, and this way actually you might get quite good performance in, for example, similarity measures. You no longer have to lemmatize, but the problem is, of course, those n-grams, if you want to display them again in something like a tag cloud, well, they're n-grams, so they're 5 character words, and they no longer have that intrinsic markerness about them that words have. So how much manual work, and then what standard do we judge against? Richard Rothschild was talking about, well, there's a lot of comparison, or there used to be, or I think there still is, comparing digital data to something that has been gathered in the offline space. And of course, I mean, we need comparisons. I'm not arguing that necessarily the offline data has more legitimacy as the online data, but in general, to judge, for example, the quality of an algorithm, what are we going to do? Are we just going to make a couple of probes? Are we going to work with learning purposes? Or for example, the Trek conferences, they work with hand annotated corpuses. So what they basically do is they have the expert annotated corpus, and then the algorithm wins that gets closest to the expert. So actually, what is the standard for quality of our algorithms? What is the standard for technical quality? Is it only technical quality, or is technical quality something more than technical quality? The third point is influence. It's also something that we're quite interested in on Twitter. Obviously, a lot of people have worked on that, as there are currently a lot of people who work on Twitter. So just a citation from a paper by Cha et al. In 2010. Using a large amounts of data gathered from Twitter, we compare 3 different measures of influence: in degree, retweets, mentions. Well, if you look at psychological studies of interpersonal influence, you will probably find deeper concepts of what influence is than only the idea of, well, I'm mentioning, I'm linking, I'm retweeting. But still, the question is legitimate. So what we're trying to do is, instead of using, let's say, words that have a strong meaning inside of a certain research tradition, as influence has, and just define them on the level of a formal model, which necessarily reduces the whole backdrop, the whole idea of that concept of influence, is to speak perhaps in simpler terms. So we're not talking about influence, but about the capacity to direct the link stream. And this is something we're trying not to do with, well, we're working with graph theory too, so we have all those measures too. But what we've looked at is, how can we get additional measures that would allow us to infer, well, on that capacity to direct the link stream. And we're currently working with the Bitly API, which unfortunately in its version 2.0 will close very soon, and we will no longer have those measures. The third version of the API no longer gives us those measures. What you see here is just the hashtag from a Bitly URI. Bitly is a URL shortener, which translates a long URL to a short URL. The identificator is it's called a hash. If I put the hash inside of the Bitly API, I get the HTTP refers, meaning the the website from which